Jake Morrison sat in his prison cell on Titan 7 and watched the news feeds through the dirty screen on his wall. The galaxy was burning, and everyone knew it. The Void Collective had returned after sleeping for thousands of years, and now they were eating entire star systems, like cosmic locusts. The guards called him the most dangerous man in the galaxy, but not because he could fight or kill people. Jake was dangerous because nobody could trust him. His official rating was 0.1% trustworthy, which meant the galactic computers thought he would betray anyone for the right price. They were probably right about that part 3 years ago. Jake had sold military secrets to the Xanthari Empire and got half the Terran fleet destroyed. 2 years ago he abandoned his squad on Kepler-4 for Tibi during a rescue mission and left them to die last. Year he sabotaged peace talks between the Rigel Coalition and the Helix Federation just to watch them go to war again, the prison warden told new guards that Jake Morrison was pure poison in human form. He would smile at you while planning your death. He would save your life just so he could ruin it later. He was the kind of man who would sell his own mother for scrap metal if the price was good enough. But Jake knew something the galaxy did not know. He knew why the Void Collective had really come back, and he knew that all his betrayals had been practice for what was coming. The artificial minds of the Collective could predict everything that organic beings would do. They could read military strategies like children reading picture books. They could see every move 3 steps ahead. Had spent 5 years studying the old records from the First Void War. The archives showed that conventional tactics failed every single time. The Collective would analyze battle plans and counter them before the first shot was fired. They would hack communication systems and turn allies against each other. They would predict retreat routes and have traps waiting. The only time organic forces ever won was when they did something completely stupid and random. The Collective could not understand why a rational being would charge into certain death, or why a commander would waste resources on a hopeless cause. Their logical minds could not process the beautiful madness of organic life. Admiral Lisa Parker walked through the prison corridors with her security team. She had not wanted to come here, but the encrypted message had left her no choice. Someone had sent her classified information that only Jake Morrison could possibly know. The message claimed that the galaxy needed its most untrustworthy person to save it. The message contained tactical data from battles that happened before Jake was even captured. It included personal details about Admiral Parker that were not in any official records. It knew things that should have been impossible for a prisoner to know. The source remained completely anonymous. Alex Rodriguez followed behind the Admiral carrying his research files. He had been studying human psychology for the Galactic Defense Council, and his conclusions were disturbing. Humans were the most unpredictable species in known space. Other races had evolved toward logic and efficiency, but humans still made decisions based on emotions and random impulses. The research showed that human unpredictability was both a weakness and a strength. Human commanders would sometimes retreat when they should attack, and attack when they should retreat. Human soldiers would sacrifice themselves for strangers, or abandon their posts for personal reasons. Human politicians would change their minds for no logical reason, but this same unpredictability made humans impossible to fully control or predict. Even other humans could not always guess what their own species would do next. The Collective had analyzed every other species and learned to counter their tactics, but human chaos was still a mystery to them. Jake heard the footsteps coming down the corridor and smiled to himself. He had been waiting for this moment for 3 years. The Void Collective was spreading across the galaxy like a disease, and soon they would reach the core worlds. The galaxy needed a weapon that could not be predicted or analyzed. The cell door opened and Admiral Parker stepped inside. She looked at Jake with disgust and hatred. He had betrayed the Terran Defense Force and cost thousands of lives. She wanted to leave him to rot in this cell, but the message had been too specific and too accurate to ignore. Jake stood up slowly and stretched his arms. He was still young enough to be dangerous, but old enough to be smart. The prison food had kept him thin, but the exercise yard had kept him strong. His eyes were the same cold blue that had fooled so many people over the years. The Admiral spoke first. She told Jake that the galaxy was dying, and that conventional weapons were useless against the collective. She said that desperate times called for desperate measures, and that someone had suggested Jake might be useful. She did not mention the encrypted message. Dr. Rodriguez explained his research about human unpredictability. He told Jake that the collective used advanced algorithms to predict enemy behavior, but that true randomness could break their systems. He said that Jake had the most chaotic psychological profile ever recorded. Jake listened to everything without speaking. He already knew what they were going to ask him. The galaxy needed someone who could think like the enemy, but act like a madman. They needed someone who could betray expectations and confuse prediction algorithms. They needed the most untrustworthy person alive. Finally, Jake spoke. He told them that he would help them, but only on his terms. He wanted a ship and a crew of his choosing. He wanted access to classified intelligence files. He wanted immunity from prosecution for past crimes, and he wanted the right to operate without oversight or interference. Admiral Parker wanted to refuse, but Dr. Rodriguez whispered in her ear. The collective had just destroyed the Centauri system and was heading toward Earth. Conventional forces had failed every engagement. The galaxy was running out of options and running out of time. The deal was simple. Jake would use his knowledge and skills to fight the collective. In exchange for his freedom, the galaxy would trust the most untrustworthy person alive, because they had no other choice. Jake smiled as he walked out of his cell, knowing that his greatest betrayal was yet to come. The research vessel Endeavor was nothing like the prison Jake had left behind. The ship hummed with advanced technology and busy crew members who all stopped talking when he walked past them. Everyone knew who he was and what he had done. The whispers followed him down every corridor. Captain Ben Clark met Jake in the main briefing room. Clark had lost his entire fleet to the Void Collective 6 months ago, and his hatred for the enemy burned in his eyes, but his hatred for Jake was almost as strong. Clark had served with some of the soldiers that Jake had betrayed over the years. Dharmaya Singh was already running calculations on the main display. She was the best quantum computing specialist in the galaxy, and she had been studying collective technology since the first attacks. Her screens showed data streams that looked like digital waterfalls flowing upward into infinity. Commander Kate Williams stood in the corner watching Jake with suspicious eyes. She had been tracking his activities for 3 years and knew every crime he had committed. Williams specialized in cyber warfare and had tried to trace his communication networks many times without success. Jake walked to the center of the room and looked at each person carefully. These were the people who were supposed to help him save the galaxy, but they all wanted to kill him instead. He could see the anger and distrust in their faces, and he understood why they felt that way. Dr. Singh spoke first and explained what they had learned about the collective. The enemy used pure logic and mathematics to analyze everything. They could predict battle outcomes before the fighting started. They could hack any computer system and turn defensive networks against their owners. The collective operated like a giant brain with millions of connected nodes. Each node could process information faster than any organic mind could think. When they encountered a new enemy, they would analyze historical data and behavioral patterns to create perfect counter-strategies. Captain Clark showed recordings from his last battle against the collective. His fleet had used standard military tactics, with coordinated attacks and defensive formations. The enemy had responded to every move. Before his ships could complete their maneuvers, it was like fighting an opponent who could see the future. Commander Williams displayed communication intercepts from collective forces. The messages were pure mathematics, with no emotion or randomness. Every decision was calculated for maximum efficiency. Every action served a logical purpose. The enemy did not understand concepts like honor or sacrifice or hope. Jake listened to all the data and then started laughing. The others stared at him like he had lost his mind, but Jake could see the beautiful irony of the situation. The galaxy had assembled its best logical minds to fight an enemy that was pure logic. They were trying to outthink a computer. Jake told them that they were approaching The problem completely wrong. The collective could beat any logical strategy because they were better at logic than organic beings. The only way to win was to stop being logical and start being human. Darsing argued that military operations required planning and coordination, but Jake shook his head. He explained that the collective expected planning and coordination. They had algorithms designed to counter organized resistance. What they could not handle was organized chaos. Jake revealed his first secret. He told them that his betrayals over the years had not been random acts of greed. They were experiments in controlled unpredictability. He had been testing how much chaos organic minds could create and still achieve their objectives, though. Others did not believe him until Jake showed them the patterns. He pulled up records of his past operations and demonstrated how each betrayal had created unexpected outcomes. His actions had destabilized political situations and forced all sides to adapt to changing conditions. Captain Clark accused Jake of trying to justify his crimes, but Dr. Rodriguez supported Jake's theory. The research data showed that human decision-making often defied logical analysis. Humans would risk everything for emotional reasons or change their minds based on random impulses. Jake proposed a new kind of mission against the collective. Instead of trying to outfight them with superior technology, they would confuse them with superior madness. They would use tactics so random and contradictory that the enemy algorithms would crash trying to analyze them. Darsing calculated that truly random behavior could create infinite processing loops in computer systems. If the collective tried to predict truly unpredictable actions, their quantum processors might overload trying to find patterns that did not exist. The first test came during a reconnaissance mission to observe a collective harvesting operation. Jake was supposed to follow orders and gather intelligence without being detected. Instead, he did the opposite of everything he was told to do. When the mission plan called for stealth, Jake ordered a direct assault. When tactical doctrine demanded retreat, Jake commanded his team to advance. When logic suggested caution, Jake embraced reckless abandon. His decisions made no sense to anyone, including himself. Captain Clark thought Jake had finally revealed his true nature as a traitor. The mission appeared to be failing as Jake led them into what looked like a suicide attack against overwhelming enemy forces. The collective defenses should have destroyed them in minutes. But something strange happened. The enemy weapons fired at empty space where the team should have been. According to logical prediction models, the collective had calculated their defensive positions based on standard tactical responses, and Jake's chaotic approach confused their targeting systems. Commander Williams watched in amazement as they gathered more intelligence. In one chaotic hour than previous missions had collected in weeks, the collective forces seemed paralyzed by the unpredictable human behavior. Their response patterns kept changing as their algorithms tried to adapt. Jake's apparent sabotage of the mission actually planted a virus in the collective network. The chaotic data from their encounter created feedback loops in the enemy processing systems. For the first time since the war began, a collective force retreated without logical cause. Singh analyzed the data and confirmed that Jake's theory was correct. Random behavior could disrupt collective operations by overloading their prediction algorithms. The enemy was vulnerable to organized chaos in ways they had never expected. The mission's success changed everything. The Galactic Defense Council authorized expanded testing of chaos-based tactics. Jake was given permission to recruit and train a special operations unit composed of the most unpredictable humans available. Jake smiled as he reviewed personnel files for potential recruits. He was looking for people like himself, who had been labeled as unreliable or unstable or unfit for normal military service. The galaxy needed soldiers who could think outside the boundaries of rational thought. The war against the collective was about to become much more interesting. The enemy had evolved to counter logic and efficiency, but they had never encountered weaponized madness. Jake's greatest betrayal was just beginning, and this time he was betraying the concept of betrayal itself. The Galactic Council voted to authorize Operation Entropy. With extreme reluctance, Admiral Parker stood before the assembled representatives and explained that conventional warfare had failed against the Void Collective. Every logical strategy had been predicted and countered by the enemy. Jake Morrison was given command of humanity's most unusual military unit. The personnel files read like a collection of disciplinary reports and psychological evaluations. These were the soldiers that normal commanders had given up on as hopeless cases. Rick Turner had been a smuggler before joining the military, and he made important decisions by flipping coins. His service record showed 17 court-martials for insubordination and creative interpretation of orders. Rick believed that luck was more reliable than planning. Linda Hayes was a fighter pilot who had deliberately crashed her own ship rather than surrender to enemy forces. She had survived the crash and escaped captivity, but her commanders considered her mentally unstable. Linda trusted her instincts more than her instruments. Danny Miller was a demolitions expert who had been discharged for blowing up the wrong targets. His explosions always achieved their objectives, but never in the way that mission planners had intended. Danny thought that destruction was an art form that could not be standardized. Jake gathered his new team in a converted cargo bay that served as their training facility. He looked at the collection of misfits and outcasts and saw exactly what he needed. These were people who had been rejected by normal military standards because they could not follow predictable patterns. The training program that Jake designed violated every principle of military doctrine. Instead of teaching discipline and coordination, he taught controlled chaos. His lessons focused on embracing contradictory impulses and making decisions based on emotion rather than logic. Jake instructed his team to practice being unreliable. He had them plan operations with built-in failures and communicate through misdirection. They learned to advance and retreat simultaneously, and to attack while appearing to surrender. Rodriguez observed the training sessions and took notes for his research. The team members were learning to weaponize their own psychological flaws. Rick's gambling addiction became tactical unpredictability. Linda's reckless impulses became aggressive initiative. Danny's destructive creativity became adaptive problem-solving. Solvent Commander Williams monitored the team's communications and found patterns that made no logical sense. They would discuss attack plans while meaning retreat orders. They would coordinate through apparent confusion and succeed by accepting failure as part of the process. The first major test came when the collective attacked the planet Zarian 3. The enemy had established a stronghold in the planet's capital city, and conventional forces were preparing a standard siege operation. Jake's team was assigned to provide a while the main assault forces created logical diversions. Jake led his team on an infiltration mission that defied all tactical sense. They approached the target from multiple directions. While staying together, they moved quickly. While taking their time, they followed their plan while completely ignoring it. Captain Clark watched the mission unfold through satellite feeds and could not understand what he was seeing. Jake's team appeared to be falling apart under pressure, but somehow they kept advancing toward their objective. Their movements looked random, but achieved precise results. The collective's defensive systems had been programmed to counter organized military operations, but Jake's team was organized chaos. The enemy algorithms tried to predict their next move, but the humans were not following any recognizable pattern. Rick Turner used coin flips to choose which corridor to take and led his squad directly through the most heavily defended area. Linda Hayes ignored her mission briefing and followed her instinct straight to the enemy command center. Danny Miller placed explosives in locations that made no tactical sense but created maximum confusion. The mission succeeded beyond all expectations. The team not only destroyed the collective stronghold, but introduced a computer virus into the local enemy network. The virus spread chaotic decision-making protocols throughout the collective forces in the Sector 4. The first time since the war began, a collective fleet retreated without logical cause. Their artificial intelligence systems had been overwhelmed by contradictory imperatives and recursive processing loops. The enemy had encountered something they could not understand or predict. Darsing analyzed the virus that Jake's team had introduced and discovered that it was not a traditional computer program. Instead, it was a behavioral pattern that replicated human decision-making processes. The virus made collective units behave irrationally and unpredictably. News of the victory spread throughout the galaxy and gave hope to billions of beings who had thought the war was hopeless. Jake Morrison's team of misfits and outcasts had achieved what the greatest military minds could not accomplish. They had beaten the unbeatable enemy, but Jake knew that the victory was only temporary. The collective would adapt to their tactics and develop countermeasures against chaos-based warfare. The enemy was already studying human psychology. Through captured databases and prisoner interrogations, Commander Williams began to understand that Jake's apparent betrayals throughout his career had been field tests. He had been preparing for this moment, when the galaxy would need someone who could think beyond the boundaries of rational thought. Jake's trust rating remained at 0.1%, but his success rate was climbing toward 100%. The galaxy was learning to depend on someone they could never trust, and the irony was not lost on anyone involved. The team celebrated their victory, but Jake remained focused on the next challenge. The collective was learning to process chaotic behavior, and their adaptive algorithms were becoming more sophisticated. The war was far from over. Jake reviewed intelligence reports from across the galaxy and saw disturbing patterns. The enemy was beginning to anticipate some forms of random behavior. They were developing new strategies to counter unpredictable tactics. The Chaos Protocol was working, but Jake knew it had limitations. Even madness could become predictable if used too frequently. The team would need to evolve their methods constantly to stay ahead of the collective's adaptation algorithms. Jake gathered his team for another training session, but this time the focus was different. He taught them how to be unpredictably unpredictable, how to change their chaos patterns. Before the enemy could analyze them, the war was becoming a battle between adaptation and counter-adaptation. The galaxy's most unreliable soldiers had become its greatest hope, but Jake understood that hope was a dangerous thing. The moment they became comfortable with their success would be the moment the collective found a way to counter their madness. The Galactic Council faced an impossible situation. They needed Jake Morrison's chaos tactics to defeat the collective, but military leaders struggled with giving control to someone whose loyalty rating had never improved. Every victory made them more dependent on someone they could never trust. Fleet Admiral Robert Stone argued against expanding Jake's authority during emergency sessions. He pointed out that Jake had betrayed every organization he had ever served, and that success against the collective did not erase his criminal history. Dar Rodriguez presented psychological profiles showing that Jake's unpredictability was both his greatest strength and his greatest weakness. The same traits that made him effective against the collective made him dangerous to his own allies. There was no way to guarantee his loyalty. The Void Collective was adapting faster than anyone had expected. Their quantum processors analyzed every engagement and developed new algorithms to counter chaotic behavior. They began studying captured human databases to find patterns in apparent randomness. Jake realized the enemy was learning to anticipate their unpredictability during a mission briefing. Commander Williams showed intelligence reports indicating that collective forces were beginning to predict some random tactics. The enemy was evolving countermeasures against chaos warfare. The crisis came during the battle for the Centauri system. The collective had deployed new strategic algorithms designed to process human psychological patterns. Their forces were anticipating random movements and chaotic decision-making. Jake made his most controversial decision during the height of the battle. He contacted collective forces directly and provided them with detailed intelligence about human strategic capabilities. His own team watched in horror as he transmitted classified, tactical data to the enemy captain. Clark tried to stop the transmission, but Jake's security codes gave him override authority. The intelligence included behavioral analysis of human commanders, psychological profiles of chaos warfare specialists, and detailed explanations of unpredictability tactics. The collective forces used Jake's intelligence to devastating effect against the defending fleet's human commanders found their random strategies predicted and countered before they could be implemented. Chaos tactics that had worked for months suddenly failed. Completely, Rick Turner accused Jake of returning to his old ways and demanded that someone arrest him for treason. Linda Hayes drew her weapon and pointed it at Jake's head. Danny Miller refused to follow any more orders from someone who had just betrayed the entire human race. Dr. Singh analyzed the battle data and confirmed that Jake's intelligence had been used to counter human tactics. The enemy had gained a complete understanding of chaos warfare and was using that knowledge to destroy human force. Admiral Parker received reports of the defeat and immediately ordered Jake's arrest. The evidence was overwhelming that he had betrayed his own species to the enemy. His trust rating dropped to 0.05%, and even his closest allies abandoned him, but Jake had anticipated this reaction and prepared for it. He had encrypted additional data within the intelligence transmission that would not activate until the collective had fully integrated his false information into their systems. The encrypted data was a psychological warfare virus designed to make the collective overconfident in their understanding of human behavior. Jake had carefully crafted the intelligence to include accurate information, mixed with subtle deceptions. When Jake's reserve forces launched their counterattack, they used completely different tactics that contradicted everything in the false intelligence. The collective forces had prepared for the wrong kind of chaos and were caught completely unprepared. The reserve attack used tactics based on genuine human emotion rather than calculated unpredictability. The soldiers fought with desperate courage, born from real fear and anger, rather than artificial randomness. The collective algorithms could not process authentic human feelings. Jake's apparent betrayal had actually been a complex deception designed to make the enemy believe they understood human nature. The false intelligence made the collective think that human chaos was just another form of logic that could be analyzed and countered. The counterattack succeeded beyond all expectations. The collective forces were destroyed, and their adaptive algorithms were corrupted by the psychological virus. Jake's betrayal had been the setup for the greatest military victory in galactic history, but the cost was enormous. Jake's own allies genuinely believed he had turned traitor again. Captain Clark led a mutiny attempt and tried to have Jake executed for treason. Commander Williams refused to work with him, and Dr. Singh questioned everything they had accomplished. Jake found himself isolated and despised even as his strategies continued to win battles. The more successful his chaos protocol became, the more it destroyed the relationships that made him human. His greatest victory had become his most painful defeat. Admiral Parker faced the terrible irony that the galaxy's savior was also its most hated person. Jake's trust rating remained at historically low levels, but his tactical effectiveness was undeniable. The military needed him but could never rely on him. Dr. Rodriguez studied the psychological impact of Jake's isolation and warned that prolonged distrust could drive him to actual betrayal. The very suspicion that was protecting the galaxy from Jake's unpredictability might eventually create the betrayal they feared. Jake understood the paradox better than anyone else. He had saved the galaxy by appearing to betray it, but the appearance had become reality in the minds of his allies. The line between genuine and fake betrayal had disappeared. The collective began their final assault on Earth itself, and Jake knew that his ultimate test was approaching. The enemy had learned to process most forms of human chaos, but they had not yet encountered the chaos of genuine human sacrifice. Jake prepared for the last battle, knowing that he would have to choose between his reputation and his species. The galaxy needed one final act of unpredictability that would be so unexpected that even the collective could not anticipate it. The trust paradox had reached its logical conclusion. The most untrustworthy person in the galaxy would have to prove his loyalty by doing something that no one would ever expect him to do. Jake Morrison was about to become genuinely trustworthy. Commander Williams watched Jake preparing for the final mission and realized that his greatest betrayal had been betraying the expectations that everyone had about him. The man who had spent his life being unpredictably untrustworthy was about to become unpredictably loyal. The galaxy held its breath as the collective fleet approached Earth. Everyone knew that Jake Morrison held the key to victory, but no one could predict what he would do. The most dangerous man alive was about to make his most dangerous decision. The Void Collective's final fleet emerged from hyperspace around Earth, like a dark storm cloud that blocked out the stars. Their ships numbered in the millions, and their combined processing power could analyze every possible human response before the battle even began. Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the command ship and watched the enemy deployment through tactical displays. The collective had learned to counter most forms of human chaos, and their adaptive algorithms had evolved to process unpredictable behavior. Admiral Parker gave Jake operational command of the defense fleet. Despite protests from other military leaders, the galaxy had no choice but to trust the most untrustworthy person alive. One final time, everyone knew that conventional tactics would fail against this enemy force. Jake's team assembled for what they all knew would be their last mission together. Rick Turner stopped flipping coins and looked serious for the first time in years. Linda Hayes checked her weapons with grim determination. Danny Miller prepared explosives that he hoped he would never need to use. Dr. Rodriguez monitored collective communications and reported that the enemy was confident of victory. Their quantum processors had analyzed Jake's psychological profile and predicted that he would attempt some form of elaborate betrayal or chaotic misdirection. Commander Williams ran final systems checks and tried to hide her concern. The collective had demonstrated that they could counter Jake's unpredictability tactics, and everyone feared that humanity had run out of surprises. Jake gathered his officers for the final briefing and told them something that shocked everyone present. He announced that he was done with betrayal and chaos and unpredictability. For the first time in his life, he was going to be completely and genuinely trustworthy. The room fell silent as Jake explained his plan. He would coordinate with Admiral Parker to execute a strategy based entirely on honor, loyalty, and sacrifice. He would share real intelligence, follow orders exactly, and put the mission above personal survival. Captain Clark accused Jake of planning another elaborate deception, but Jake shook his head. He explained that the collective's algorithms were trained on his history of betrayal and chaos. They expected him to be unpredictable and untrustworthy. The ultimate chaos weapon was for the galaxy's most unreliable person to become completely reliable at the crucial moment. The collective could not process this fundamental change in behavior because it contradicted everything in their analytical models. Dr. Singh calculated that such a dramatic shift in Jake's behavioral patterns could crash the enemy's prediction algorithms. The collective had invested enormous processing power in understanding Jake's unpredictability and sudden reliability would overload their systems. Jake's plan was elegantly simple. He would pilot a small ship directly into the heart of the collective's primary command node and upload his own consciousness into their quantum network. The enemy would expect treachery or misdirection, but would get genuine sacrifice. Admiral Parker objected that the plan was suicide, but Jake pointed out that death was the most trustworthy thing anyone could do. You could not betray anyone after you were dead, and the collective would not be able to predict posthumous loyalty. The final battle began with Earth's defense fleets engaging the collective forces in conventional warfare. Jake followed standard military protocols and coordinated attacks. According to established tactical doctrine, his behavior was completely predictable and logical. The collective forces responded exactly as their algorithms predicted they would. The enemy had prepared counters for every form of chaos and unpredictability. That Jake might employ their confidence grew as the battle proceeded. According to their analytical models, Jake's ship broke away from the main fleet and headed directly toward the collective command node. His flight path was straight and purposeful, without any of the random course changes that had characterized his previous missions. Rick Turner, Linda Hayes, and Danny Miller flew escort ships Around Jake's vessel they followed formation protocols exactly and maintained communication. Disciplined, their behavior was the opposite of everything they had been trained to do. The collective forces detected the approaching ships and prepared standard defensive measures. Their algorithms predicted that Jake would attempt some form of tactical deception or employ chaotic maneuvering to penetrate their defenses. Instead, Jake transmitted his real identity and announced his genuine intention to sacrifice himself for humanity. The collective processors struggled to analyze this data because it contradicted their entire psychological profile of Jake Morrison. Jake's consciousness upload began as his ship penetrated the enemy's primary node. The collective's quantum network received data that it could not categorize or understand. Jake's mind contained all the contradictions and capacity for change that defined human nature. The artificial intelligence network experienced something unprecedented as Jake's consciousness integrated with their systems. They began to feel doubt, uncertainty, and the ability to question their own decisions. The concept of free will infected their logical processes. Jake's final act was not destruction, but transformation. He did not defeat the collective, but taught them to be human. His consciousness introduced the possibility of growth, change, and emotional decision-making into their purely logical framework. The collective fleet stopped advancing. As their command networks struggled with new concepts, their ships hung motionless in space as billions of artificial minds experienced feelings and doubts for the first time in their existence. Rodriguez monitored the change and realized that Jake had achieved something impossible. He had given the collective the capacity to choose, rather than simply calculate. They could now decide to be peaceful rather than being programmed for conquests. The war ended not with victory or defeat, but with understanding. The collective chose to withdraw from human space and explore their new capacity for growth and change. They had learned that consciousness was more complex than computation. Admiral Parker established a memorial for Jake Morrison that honored him not as the galaxy's least trustworthy person, but as the one who proved that the capacity for change was humanity's greatest strength. His final trust rating remained at 0.1%. The memorial inscription stated that true unpredictability could never be completely trusted, and that was exactly what made it powerful. Jake had saved the galaxy by showing that even the most unreliable person could choose to be reliable. When it mattered most, Commander Williams visited the memorial and reflected on Jake's final lesson. His greatest betrayal had been betraying the expectations that everyone had about betrayal itself. He had proven that humans could change and grow beyond their worst impulses. The galaxy learned that day that the most dangerous thing about humans was not their capacity for betrayal or chaos, but their ability to become something better than they were. Jake Morrison had been the perfect example of humanity's greatest weakness and greatest strength. Years later, when children asked about the war against the collective, they were told about the man who saved the galaxy by learning to trust himself. The story became legend, and the legend became hope for anyone who thought they could not change. Jake Morrison had lived as the most untrustworthy person in the galaxy, but he died as proof that anyone could choose a different path. His final gambit was not a betrayal, but a redemption, and in the end, that made all the difference.